Thank you for coming to the physical and literal boiling pot of federal policy, you brave souls. Thank you for being here. It's a little warm, so we'll keep the doors open. Go ahead and have a seat. I know, standing room only. Everybody loves policy. All right, we have one last group coming off the elevator. We'll let them have a seat. All right. So we have 75 minutes together. I know, it's exciting. And when I was asked to moderate this discussion, I was like, 75 minutes talking about federal policy. Oh, what could there possibly be to say? I guess we're going to wrap up and go to lunch, everybody. So we'll find a way to fill the time, but thank you all for being here. There's plenty to talk about, and I know it feels like a very interesting time to be alive, to be American, and to figure out how we navigate this new terrain that we're in. There's been a lot of shifts. I used to work at the State Department, so all my federal government friends have been on speed dial lately with questions and thoughts about everything that's happening. So today we're just going to unpack it. We're going to unpack what we can. We're going to talk about the opportunities that exist, because in chaos there's always opportunity. We're going to talk about what's at risk, and we're going to talk about how we navigate this together, and that, not all decisions are made in Washington. They happen right here. So let's think about the role that we play as we listen to each of these amazing people share their insights. As many of you know, last year at the Project Play Summit, we talked about launching a policy roundtable. That is in effect. So we have 3 great panelists from the policy, actually 4 from the policy roundtable who are here with us, and we're going to share what that roundtable looks like. Jared Cooper is co-chair of that from FUNDPlay, and he can share a little bit about what he's been working on. But we want to look at innovative policy solutions to the problems. Some things work bottom up, some things work top down, and it's going to take all of us in both ways to meet in the middle and to figure out how to drive this system forward. So during this breakout, we are also going to hear from Betsy Cooper, the director of the Aspen Policy Academy, who's going to give us really specific call to action things, right? I love learning, but then also I'm I would like to also apply it. So I think there's going to be a piece at the end where it's we love to talk about it with our friends, but then we don't know how to act. So she's going to give us a how to act, how to engage, how to make your voice heard, which I think will be really powerful. So please stay till the end. And as any of you know, it's impossible to really talk about everything that's happening in the youth sports space if you're not thinking about the seismic shifts that are happening at the NCAA level, right? It's a domino. It's above and below. What's happening to the Olympic sport movement, what's happening to women's sports, what's happening below that. Everything rests in this new athletes' rights, NIL, how people are choosing to spend their money. So all of that is now going to be framed by our resident expert, Ramogi Huma, who is an OG in the space, and I'll let him give his introduction, but the executive director of the National College Players Association, and he's been literally this one-man show for a long time, who's been effectively advocating in the space for college athletes' rights and playing a pivotal role in the NIL space, as well as employment rights and just fair treatment of student athletes. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you to Ramogi and for him to take you through a quick presentation about what's happening on the Hill as it relates to college sports.
All right, well, thank you for that introduction. And I'd like to thank Project Play, Tom Ferry, for inviting me here today. I only have 10 minutes, so I'll jump right into it. I really want to talk about a couple of our primary goals as an organization. One of them is to preserve sports on the college level, and the other is to ensure that college athletes have a chance to be compensated fairly. Now, there's been an evolution, and really wanted to focus in on the shifting college sports landscape and how that could lead to reductions in youth sports participation. By and large, there's been a lot of amazing progress when it comes to compensation, and really it's been led by the states. The NCAA likes to take credit. It's been the states. Right here in the state of California, our organization was a co-sponsor of the first NIL law, and we helped get that law passed in many states across the nation. And in that, right where we are right now, there's 2 major sources of compensation for college athletes. Number one, you've probably all heard of NIL collectives. These are athletic boosters. They pool their money together to provide NIL opportunities for athletes at a particular school and sometimes particular sports. Open Doors, if you're familiar with them, they're the biggest NIL platform out there, and they do a report every year. Open Doors estimates that by next year, this will amount to about $2 billion in payments from NIL collectives to athletes. This year, it's about $1.3 billion. Major, major source. Another major source is universities now with the ability to pay their athletes directly on NIL. Many are not aware about this, but as of right now, there are 7 states that have laws, and this started really, the catalyst for this started back in the summertime. Most recently, Utah just a couple weeks ago. So they're all keeping up in that space as well. This is something we fought for quite some time, and we're looking at other bills in some other states as well, like Nebraska and some other areas. So I think by this time, actually within a few months, there's not going to be a university in the nation that won't feel like they're free to pay, or won't at least have the actual right to pay relative to their state law. So a lot of evolution on that, but there has been a curveball, and one we're not particularly enjoying, and that's the House versus NCAA antitrust lawsuit settlement. You may have heard of this lawsuit settlement that says, hey, we're going to allow universities, the NCAA is going to allow universities to start to share revenue with athletes. Obviously, that would be a good step. However, this particular settlement is unjust in many ways, which is why we oppose it. One of them is because, number one, the universities aren't even the defendants. This is the NCAA and the Power 5 conferences. But they've created a structure to where if a university opts in, they're required to cut team rosters, okay, and whittle it down. ESPN did a write-up on this. They estimate in Division I, there's going to be about 5,000 less roster spots in Division I. The other issues is that it's structured to where the NCAA and conferences can impose NIL restrictions to gut the NIL collectives, which, from our perspective, obviously being a major money source, we don't want that to happen. And there's also loopholes that actually allow the NCAA and the conferences to prohibit pay from universities to their athletes. So many, many things that we oppose as an organization. And also baked into the settlement are terms that would allow for more severe cuts, okay? They can cut whole sports. They can trim rosters as much as they want. And when it comes to youth sports participation, that can have a negative effect. It can discourage families from thinking, hey, the opportunities now are much smaller than they used to. Is it worth it? And so that's how it really relates, I feel like, to this summit and youth sports participation. And our point here, you may have heard the NCAA, this is their mantra. If we pay, it's typically been in the big football, basketball discussions. If we pay football and basketball players, we have to cut the other sports because they subsidize the other sports. And it's not true. Paying college athletes does not require cuts to other sports. The NIL laws I just mentioned, whether it be third-party NIL or direct NIL compensation from universities, none of them require direct cuts to sports because it's not necessary. These are university options. These are options from third parties, NIL collectives. There's no requirement to cut sports. This is the richest conferences pretending like they don't have enough money, nickeling and diming, and just kind of wanting to reshape. And it's really disturbing how they bake that into the settlement, because that's a strong indicator about where we fear this is going to go if left unchecked. And the data supports it. I'll show you some data, but I think as you look on the next slide, kind of keep in mind, what does it cost? What does it cost to pay for non-revenue sports in college? And if you look at the bottom row, hopefully you can all see it. I'm getting older, so I can see it, but I wouldn't be able to see it from back there. Just look at Division II. These are designations. These are schools with football. Some Division I and Division II schools don't have football, but I wanted to kind of show you some numbers. This information is from the Department of Education as reported to them by the institutions themselves. If you look at Division II at the bottom, they have almost 68,000 athletes at 155 schools at a cost of $1 billion, and they pretty much break even on the average university. Now skip up to the top level, the defendant conferences, the richest conferences. They have fewer athletes at fewer schools at 8 times the cost and an average net revenue of $9.5 million. And these are the people saying there's not enough to pay players without cutting sports. How about that $9.5 million? Plain as day. And you can see there's more athletes in Division II than in Division I with far fewer resources. And if you want to go a little bit more apples and apples, look at the FCS division. Not quite as many athletes, but pretty close at more schools at roughly a quarter of the cost. So what does it cost to fund non-revenue sports? Don't believe the hype. Don't believe it. We crunch the numbers and we do this, and that's why you're wondering how these lawmakers doing. Well, we're showing them the numbers. We're educating people. So this doesn't have to be that divide and conquer the NCAA wants it to be. Pit non-revenue sports against revenue sports and make sure athletes don't get paid. And again, just the idea that the Power 5 conferences, they want to cut sports to eke out a few more dollars when it's not necessary, under the guise that they can't afford it. You have the numbers now, and that's what I wanted to make sure I showed you that in the audience here. So in terms of action steps, these are actions that we're taking to fight it. And I would just encourage, Tom's done an amazing job with this conference. This is my first time here. It's amazing. And so many people, I feel like, may have an interest, in making sure youth and non-revenue sports and women's sports aren't cut. So, think about if you have, your organization, or if you have certain relationships, or you're kind of well-positioned to maybe help on this. But these are action steps. Number one is to expose this unjust and unworkable lawsuit settlement. It's actually unworkable. I'll get into that in a minute. And we also advocate for state and federal legislation to preserve sports and reach other parts of our goals. In terms of the NCAA's position and the conference's position on the federal level, they are lobbying Congress to enshrine these unjust terms as federal law. And they also want an antitrust exemption to do it, so they can't be sued when they do it. Why is the settlement unworkable? To me, it's a smoking gun filed in court just a few weeks ago from plaintiffs' counsel. It says the settlement only resolves antitrust claims, and there's nothing in the settlement that releases noncompliance with individual state NIL laws, meaning those state NIL laws are still in effect. And as I mentioned, we've helped craft these laws. We've analyzed these laws. And we found that at least 17 states have NIL laws prohibiting universities from complying with NCAA and conference NIL restrictions permitted in the settlement. 17 states. And those are the states, if you can't see it: Arkansas, California, Colorado, Illinois, Maryland, Michigan, Missouri, Nebraska, New Mexico, New York, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. But unfortunately, there's a lack of awareness that many of the universities don't know because, again, they're not defendants. They're trusting their conferences and the NCAA to lead them to a structure that will work. So it's important for us to get information out to colleges, to NIL collectives, lawyers, attorneys general, lawmakers, the media. First and foremost, universities, you may have liability. If you opt into this settlement, you may be breaking your state's NIL law. And importantly for this discussion, if schools that don't opt in are not required to cut sports, the schools are cutting sports already, thinking we have to transition. Some of them, they may be in violation of their own state law, but they need to understand. So the easiest way to make sure there's no cuts on the college level right now, everybody, is to let schools know, hey, look, this is probably illegal in your state, and you don't have to cut sports. The Ivy League actually did this a couple weeks ago. They announced they're not opting in. They also announced they're not complying with the cuts. So that's important. NIL collectives in 17 states, they can disregard these NIL restrictions because their state laws protect them. And if you can't stop them all, if you can't stop one, you're not stopping any of them because they have to compete. That's the whole nature of this thing. It's the free market. And college athletes now have that as access to compensation. And just common sense, colleges that opt in to the settlement will lose recruits to teams whose NIL collectives have no restrictions in these 17 states and beyond. And as I mentioned, they're also going to be able to pay their athletes directly. So what is a workable solution that we're advocating for? It's for the universities to opt out, pay their athletes, and preserve roster spots on their teams. And again, if there's any interest in collaboration, I'm on the app. Email is up there. And with that, I will sit down and pass it along to this great panel. Thank you.
Yeah, as a woman who played college basketball, I know all about that football argument and how we should just be happy to be here. So thanks for highlighting that yet again. So now we're going to turn it over to the seismic shifts that happened with the college landscape. What does that look like on the Hill? What are the opportunities? We've got 3 seasoned experts who can help us with Capitol Hill 101, how does this all work? And I just want to take a minute just to introduce them, to just unpack what's happening there. And please clap it up for our 3 experts. To my right, we have Jared Cooper, Executive Director of FUNDPlay. Access to sport is often dictated by resources. No one understands that better than Jared, and he's here to share some insights on innovative funding models and how we can rethink investment. This is like a starting lineup. Somebody cue the Bulls music. All right, Jennifer Dionne, president and founder of the Dionne Company. Policy change doesn't just happen in a vacuum. It takes strategic advocacy, coalition building, and deep engagement with lawmakers. Jennifer will shed light on how we can leverage legislative opportunities and build bipartisan support. With a long history on the Hill, and also a college women's soccer player and a mom coach. So give it up for Jennifer. All right, and we have Katie Adamson, Vice President, Health Partnerships and Policy at the YMCA. For over a decade, the Y has been a cornerstone of community-based youth sports, shaping generations of young athletes. Katie will help us understand how to make sports more accessible, particularly for low-income and underserved communities. Thank you, Katie. All right, so all of these should just be soft toss at this point. With the new administration and shifting dynamics in Congress, we're entering into a new era, right? A second Trump administration and a new term. So what we want you all to unpack for us is, where do youth sports fit in the agenda? And what are the new opportunities, maybe funding, tax incentives, mega events, that can drive investment? And what are some of the challenges? How do we navigate all of this? Opening question, what does it look like? How do we navigate it? So I'm going to start with Katie.
So hi, I think this is working, yeah? I have been at the Y about 20 years. The Y has been involved in sports and athletics for or turning 175 next year. So it'll be a big year for us. I have been talking about, we've been in partnership with the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, for the past 20 years, working on evidence-based program to address health complications that result from lack of physical activity. So in this room, quickly, how many of you know somebody with diabetes or prediabetes in your immediate family? Keep your hands up. How many of you know somebody with hypertension? So I would say it's at least over half the room, because 6 in 10 Americans today live with at least one chronic disease, and 7 in 10 Americans are going to die from a chronic disease. And physical activity starting young is how we're going to prevent that from happening. And that's with youth sports, but also just play, free play. And it's essential that we understand what we're up against. The Diabetes Advocacy Alliance talked about the fact that if trends don't change, we're going to see a 700% increase in kids with type 2 diabetes by 2060. And with kids, they convert from prediabetes to diabetes pretty rapidly, so you could see a 13-year-old suffering from limb loss by 20. So, I mean, this is serious, and 1 in 3 kids live with overweight or obesity. So what's really interesting about the things that I'm talking about is all of a sudden we have a Secretary of Health and Human Services saying the exact same thing. The last time I remember a Secretary of HHS saying anything about obesity or inactivity was Tommy Thompson in 2001. And so we do have somebody at the helm that is actually very physically fit and cares about what kids put into their bodies, and that's a good thing. And we need to take advantage of that as a community to remind them that if you can get a kid to play in sports in their adolescence, they're going to be 8 times more likely, as the Aspen Institute says, to be physically active when they're 24. And so we have to start young, and we have to find a way to get kids engaged. So what do we think about when we think about what we ask this administration to look at? Where are kids? Kids are in schools. We have got to get kids active again in schools. That's where all kids are. If we're going to hit low-income kids, they're in schools. If they're not in schools, 1 in 2 low-income kids is on Medicaid. 1 in 2. Kids in this country, actually, are on Medicaid. That's amazing, right? So if health care plans started paying, if Medicaid started paying for some of these programs. So the Y has already been able to secure Medicaid coverage for swim instruction to prevent drowning. You may or may not know that drowning is the leading cause of death for 0 to 4-year-olds in this country. And if kids don't drown and they end up in the hospital, $58 billion a year in cost to this country. So that's why Medicaid is investing in swim instruction. So schools, Medicaid healthcare systems, out-of-school time providers, the Y, Parks and Rec, Boys and Girls Club. How do we make summer magic? How do we find resources for summertime play, and physical activity. I think I'll stop there. But those are some of the things we need to be talking about with this new administration. How do we find where kids are, low-income kids, and find coverage for them to be part of youth sports?
Yeah, thank you for that. And if you look at the Project Play website, there was also a study, just to corroborate what you said, that if we were able to hit the 63% number, then we can cut, like, it's $80 billion in healthcare savings if we could get to that number. That's 4 million more kids. That's the retention of kids. So amazing. Thank you for that. Jen, what are your insights on the Hill, master lobbyist?
Well, first of all, sitting up here with 2 torn ACLs, I think I'm on the wrong panel. Thanks for having me, and I echo what everyone said. This has been a great 2 days. Let me say, I've spent my entire career in Washington, and this moment feels hard. It is hard, and it feels chaotic, and that is, I think, just sending ripples everywhere. And I just want to say, one, our democracy is stronger than any one administration. We are going to thrive, survive. This is a messy democracy, is messy and imperfect. Kevin said it in the panel ahead of us. So one, I want to say Washington is very cyclical. We are used to this. It changes every 2, 4, 6 years. The administration changes. Executive orders are not new to Washington. These are hard, and some of the way that this administration is choosing to do it is painful, and the sledgehammer approach is different. But there is and there will be opportunity from chaos. When you break something, you have to rebuild it. And oftentimes, I think it is about how we frame things, from administration to administration, from Congress to Congress. The same issues are important to people, but it is oftentimes how you frame it, and I think that's what we have to think about. Also, issues are going to be really hard, right? You have really tight margins in Congress, and you have an administration that is polarizing a lot of people. Members of Congress are going to want to do things, and the area of youth sport gives us an opportunity. It's a bipartisan issue. It's a bicameral issue. As Katie just said, RFK is talking about it. He cares about fitness. This administration cares about fitness. So I do think it is in finding, and I think Ash has asked a really tough question about what are the opportunities. Some of it, it's too early. It's too early to know what they are, but they're there. And I think too, talking about, what are the opportunities with this year, this decade of sport, just take the World Cup. 16 cities, 10 states. That's over 50 members of Congress who are going to care deeply about what happens in their backyard. They're going to want to advocate, so let's give them something to advocate about that they can get behind. And so I just want to say, I know it's hard. I feel it. I live it every day in DC. But there will be opportunity, and I would encourage you to get in the arena, not to sit on the sidelines, because while it feels and it is difficult, there is going to be things that happen, and you all want to be in the room when it happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. And I do think sport is one of the great levers that can promote peace and unity between people. It is one issue that people can agree on, seemingly. So I know we dedicated a whole conference to it. But anyway, Jared, you're in a little different space, new to FUNDPlay. Would love for you to explain a little bit about that, and then what you all are trying to execute and how it matters in this conversation.
Yeah, so first and foremost, how many people here have had a conversation with or a meeting with their federal elected officials? By raise of hands. So not that many. Jen has said she worked her whole career in Washington. Katie has decades of experience. Ash has worked in Washington. I have not. 5 years ago, I had never had a phone call meeting with an elected official. And when youth sports shut down, the Play Sports Coalition was formed. League Apps, a company that I had been working with at the time, led by Jeremy Goldberg and others, kind of took the mantle of creating this Play Sports Coalition and bringing organizations together. And there was this vacuum of youth sports advocacy, and I kind of opportunistically fell into that, not having any experience or background in Washington or with government affairs. And I say all this to say, that the barrier to entry is not that high to advocate for youth sports, to advocate for your organization, for policies that are going to make youth sports more accessible and better for all kids. Betsy Cooper, no relation, just a great last name, is going to be diving a little bit deeper on this after our panel. But from the Play Sports Coalition and the work that we were doing, Peter Franzilis from Team Snap, they've been a tremendous partner in the Play Sports Coalition. He mentioned yesterday that we've unlocked $35 million in youth sports grant funding at the state level. And we've been working at the federal level as well, introduced a piece of legislation over the last 2 Congresses that ultimately got a little bit of traction but didn't pass. And so we're looking for opportunities to continue to promote youth sports, to create funding and opportunities for organizations to be able to continue to serve the kids in their communities, particularly those that are running free and low-cost programs in underserved communities. And so we think about what are the ways to do that, and Ash kind of framed this as what are the challenges, what are the opportunities. Jen mentioned there's a lot of uncertainty, there's chaos, but there are opportunities that can come from that. And so the way I think about it is what are the ways that we can align with what this administration wants to accomplish. And I think it's fair to say that this year they are very focused on tax policy, extending tax cuts. So are there opportunities through tax policy that can increase youth sports participation, lower the cost through incentives of getting equipment, of registering for programs, of building, refurbishing, renovating play spaces? So that is something that we'll explore. Is there an opportunity there? We think there might be. If that door closes, then we just have to be nimble and pivot to something else that might work, whether it's executive orders, whether it's something that doesn't require increased funding, because that generally seems to be a non-starter with this administration. So we're going to continue to search for opportunities. Ash had mentioned the Youth Sports Policy Roundtable that we're co-chairing, and there's great ideas that are coming from that group and people coming together to align, possibly for the first time across youth sports on this. And we're just going to see what we're able to accomplish and keep our ear to the ground. But I think it's imperative that you all in the room are part of that as well, because you are constituents of your elected representatives and represent organizations and kids and families that are really important to not only your community, but to those officials as well. And so youth sports, if you think about the most intractable problems and challenges that we're having as a country, youth sports is a proven intervention for many of them. Physical and mental health, educational outcomes, youth social isolation and loneliness, interactions with the juvenile justice system, military readiness. So every one of our elected officials that are represented in this room that you're constituents of cares about one of these things, and tailoring the message to them is a way to move forward with showing them that youth sports is the way to solve some of these problems. So.
Yeah, perfect. So let's jump into some juicy topics that have already been kind of teased here. We have RFK Jr., we have DOE and Title IX, we have military readiness. Let's tackle some of those things. So maybe we can start with you, Katie, just thinking about RFK Jr.'s appointment as the head of Health and Human Services and his focus on preventative medicine, chronic disease, lifestyle changes, nutrition. Where do you see the opportunities for youth sport in this agenda, and how can we position, what kind of messaging or angles do you think will resonate under this leadership?
Interesting, the other thing that RFK Jr. has talked about is the cost of chronic disease. And as a nation, our healthcare spending is $5 trillion. 90% of that is spent on paying for people living with chronic disease. So we don't have a health system in this country. We have a sick care system. We've never invested in prevention ever in this country. And even the CDC is a fraction of the investment that we need to make to prevent people from getting chronic disease. And so he has said it. Now, CDC, we have always advocated at the Y for funding for CDC, and whether or not you know it, your states all get tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars from the Centers for Disease Control. The reason we can have a 63 by 30 is that CDC is tracking, how much kids are participating in sports. CDC is tracking whether or not kids are eating well. Like, there are things people don't know about the agency. They're funding to make sure that when you have diabetes, you don't lose a limb. There's so much going on there, and we don't want to lose the CDC. So the Y has been a very big advocate of funding that gets down to states for prevention of disease. So that's a priority. We've also been a huge advocate of drowning prevention, and we've worked with USA Swimming and a host of others, Red Cross, to create the first ever drowning prevention program, but it's also swim instruction. So if you think about swimming and sports, think of all the activities you can't do if you don't know how to swim. 70% of the earth is water, and kids are 100% curious. So every day, a child runs a risk of drowning if they haven't learned how to swim. So that one is an interesting one because folks don't want kids to drown. And yet, if you teach a kid to swim, it opens up a world of physical activity. So think about that and think about drowning. And that 0 to 4, it's a leading cause of death. This actually has an impact when you talk to legislators, and I hope it would also have an impact with RFK. But we have to be able to talk about saving money, the economic impact we have in communities when we invest in sports, the educational outcomes we have, the health outcomes. We have to be able to talk about impact better in order to grow the youth sports work. We absolutely have to, because the Republican Party cares about the cost effectiveness of things and impact. So whatever you're doing, you need to be measuring impact and talking about it. So when it comes to RFK, those are the kind of conversations we're going to be having. How are we investing in health, not disease treatment, right? How are we preventing an illness from happening in the first place? And how are we opening up a world of activity for our kids?
Yeah, thank you for that, Katie. Jen, I want to ask you about 7 questions in one, but I'm going to refrain. I'm going to try to make this one question, but I didn't have a pen up here. So, okay, so I'm thinking about, your background. You've worked a lot with DOD, so I would love for you to touch a little bit on military readiness and how that may be a message that could be spoken across the aisle. So I would love for you to touch a little bit on that. And then I know yesterday, as we were standing in line for lunch, we also talked to someone who said, hey, if DOE, Department of Education, goes away, is Title IX done? So those are 2 questions in one. I eliminated the other 5. So if you could start with military readiness and maybe your background with DOD, and then transition to Title IX and maybe talk to the fears that are in the room.
Sure, thank you. One, I am a military daughter of father served, and my brother is currently deployed as a battalion commander in Korea. So DOD is a big part of my personal life, the military service, and also in our firm, we do a lot of work here. This goes back to my opening remarks about how you reframe things and where you look for opportunity. Katie's talking about the CDC, and are we probably going to lose funding from the CDC? Yes, right? Where can we find other ways that there can be funding and there can be priority around youth sport and fitness? The Department of Defense has always partnered with organizations around youth fitness because of recruitment and our readiness. All the services in recent years have had to extend their boot camp by several weeks because we're not fit, right? And so you are looking at the services trying to find opportunities. Also, the President's Physical Fitness Council, I think RFK talked about it in his nomination hearing. That is a place where I think that was started by folks caring about readiness and recruitment. And so there is a tie there. I don't know what the exact opportunity is, too early, but I am telling you, I think that there will be. This is something this administration cares about. It's, again, when you look at members and in their states, they all have military families, they have military bases, they have youth sports, they've got kids in DOD schools. So I think that there is a place there. On Title IX, if the Department of Education gets reduced, if it goes away, Title IX does not go away. It is statute, it is law. Title IX was created under the Civil Rights Act, and the Department of Education has oversight of Title IX, which is a very important thing, and I am not underplaying it. But Title IX does not go away if the Department of Education were to get reshaped or reduced. And I think if you saw an attempt to get rid of Title IX, there would be a pushback. We have more women serving in Congress today than we ever have. There are advocates in this room and all over the place for Title IX. So I don't know, I do know it is statute. I don't know that we will see an attack on Title IX from the administration, but we did get asked that question yesterday, whether it would go away.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I read a stat. I don't know if this was Aspen research, but 2 out of 5 18-year-olds are actually fit enough to even enter into boot camp. So that's kind of depressing, I think, as an American. But we're going to work on that. That's why we're here.
Katie's already working on it. She runs a pre-boot camp at the Y, correct?
SEALs and some Rangers. We have an armed services Y that's located near every major military base in the country. So we have a deep historic, we won the Nobel Peace Prize for our work during wartime after World War I and World War II, taking care of prisoners of war. And we came home and started the USO and then created Ys near and adjacent to all the major military facilities. So the DoD is contracted with a Y to help get people ready for boot camp.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of good nuggets. Glad you came. All right, Jared, to you. Let's talk about money. Where's the money? Let's talk about the dollar bills. So thinking about federal funding streams and economic development, legislation around that, using existing funds or redirecting other funds, like, can you just share with us like what you've learned in the dollar bill space?
Sure.
Is that your rap name, by the way?
Dollar bill space. Dollar bill space. That's
Dollar
me.
Bill Cooper.
I referenced earlier a bill that we had introduced the last couple sessions that did not ultimately pass, and that would have created a $75 million grant fund out of the CDC. And ultimately, we're not actively trying to push forward that piece of legislation in this Congress because we don't think it has a chance in its current form. So what we're looking for is what would be most impactful in terms of increasing participation and making youth sports a better experience, and what is possible, and finding that overlap. And so we think that there are pockets of funds that already exist that could be repurposed as opposed to trying to unlock new money. One of the areas that we look a lot into is, and it's been successful at the state level, ultimately this is something Project Play and Tom personally have been talking about for a number of years. He often talks about pumping ideas into the bloodstream, and one is youth sports funding from mobile sports betting revenue, a model that came from Norway and elsewhere. We've seen success at the state level. Through the Play Sports Coalition, we've unlocked money in New York, Connecticut, Washington, D.C., Massachusetts. There's bills in Ohio and Minnesota that if mobile sports betting passes, a fraction of that revenue would go to youth sports grant funding as well. So that's at the state level. Federally, every bet that is placed, there's a small tax called an excise tax that goes into a pool of funds that is estimated last year to be $250 million. And that is not allocated towards any specific purpose. So is that something that we can push for to go towards youth sports? We don't need to put forth a new bill for $75 million when there's $250 million sitting somewhere that is currently not appropriated. So that's one area, and it ties very closely with some of the research that Project Play has been putting out over the last decade. Another is something that Katie has been leading on recently, and Matt Libber, who you heard from yesterday, and Bill Sells, formerly of SFIA, is the Youth Sports Facilities Act. This would open up and expand eligibility from economic development dollars that are already appropriated and expand eligibility so that youth sports facilities could be funded under that act. So again, not new money, existing money that could then be used for refurbishing, renovating, building youth sports facilities and increasing participation in areas where there are sports deserts. And I think, broadly you mentioned economic impact, and you had mentioned, Katie, the CDC data and what we need to be tracking. We don't have a great grasp of the economic impact of youth sports across the country. There are opportunities to do studies. There's the Bureau of Economic Analysis that last year had passed the opportunity to run a commission to study the economic impact. I think that got kicked down the road till next year. But once we have a better sense and are able to point to government-backed numbers around this is the economic impact of youth sports across the country, we can make that case much more readily, in addition to the benefits around health and educational opportunities and otherwise. So there are some opportunities, even if not able to unlock new dollars in youth sports.
Heard it here first from Dollar Bill Cooper. Thank you. Appreciate that. And so we're going to transition into the last question before Betsy asks for some volunteers. And we're going to do some practical kind of facilitated things. But the last question, so my jam as a sporty diplomat, thinking about all the shiny objects that are coming, World Cup, Olympics, Paralympics, rugby championships, et cetera. There are 10 mega events happening in the next 10 years. We're welcoming the world to see our messy kitchen. Who are we as America? And how do we use this moment where there's a lot of media, there's a lot of money, and a lot of surplus, and a commitment to legacy? How do we use this moment with this administration to really capitalize on youth sport reform? So anybody that wants to answer, we'll take couple minutes.
Well, I could say one thing, which is, when you're watching the swimmers and you're like, I got to get back in the pool. I can see where our elected officials will be looking at these sports and thinking, we need to really do some more about youth sports. It's just, there's so much energy and magic around the events. And I mentioned earlier, like RFK, I'm going back to this because that's my theme, but RFK also oversees both Medicare and Medicaid. So I mentioned Medicaid, 1 in 2 kids are on it. It's also the largest health system in the country. Most people don't realize that. It's the biggest, largest health system in the country. What if they started to pay for prevention and invest in kids getting to do youth sports? And how do we utilize athletes from the Olympics to start making the case? And don't think that's crazy, because in Medicare, there's a fitness benefit for seniors. Why can't there be a fitness benefit for kids? So it's not crazy, and so how do we leverage these athletes to our table to raise these fundamental critical questions for the future of our kids?
Awesome, thank you.
Let me talk about the thing really gets me up in the morning. Before I am anything else, I'm a mom and I'm a coach, and I care deeply about women's sports, and man, are we having a moment. The WNBA, the Go Washington Spirit in DC, our professional soccer league. But how do we take that and then grow and build so that we don't lose this moment? We've had other moments that were about women's sports in this country, the 99ers, who are just incredible, and even before then. But right now, we, I think, really have an opportunity. And when you think about what women's sports do for leaders, right, 93% of women leaders played youth sports, right? And so what we are doing in this room and how we convey that to our leaders with the shiny objects is a great opportunity to ride the wave. And so, yes, we have, and I already talked about the World Cup. If you really break it down and start to look at this and where you can get to members and what you care about, there are ways to use these to drive policy and drive law.
One of the things that I think about is models that have been proven to work, and I think we have a great example of that. If you were here for the state session previously, you heard from Fernando from LA84 Foundation, and they're just a shining example of what a legacy project can do over decades. So LA84 was formed from the surplus funding from the LA Olympics in 1984, and 40 years later, they are continuing to impact youth sports in California and nationwide. They've, I believe, 4 million kids over the last 40 years have been impacted by their work, grants that they're still making. So this is something that can be replicated at every one of the World Cup host sites, at LA 28 in Salt Lake City in 34, and beyond. So I think that being able to use models that have already been proven to work and and replicating that as opposed to reinventing the wheel is something that we should all be looking into. And it sounds like from hearing Lex yesterday talking about Soccer Forward and the work that they're doing, that they're very focused on those legacy projects in World Cup sites. And I expect that there's going to be great things to come for decades from these events that we're hosting. We just have to take advantage of the opportunity.
Totally. Okay, so now just so you know, I always like to have the practice plan in front of me. We're going to do 15 minutes of a workshop with Betsy around policy, how to make your voice heard, like a 1, 2, 3, how do I do this? And then we're going to have some Q&A, so just so you know what's coming next. But again, the take-home message, policy is not just made in Washington. It requires all of us. There are 330 million of us, so what you do with your voice really matters. So Betsy, I'll turn it over to you, and then I'll close us out.
Awesome. You're going to run it? You're going to, okay, cool. So thanks so much for having me. I'm Betsy Cooper. I'm the director of the Aspen Policy Academy. I'm also a lifelong Buffalo Bills fan and, go Bills, and a staff member at Cal Athletics, where I help run the gymnastics scoring system, which is more complicated than you think it is, so go Bears. I'm also a parent, and I have a kid in 3 youth sports right now, so man, I feel it with all of you. But today, I'm here to give you a call to action, how you can get involved for advocating for sports policy change on topics like we just covered. Next slide. So the Aspen Policy Academy is a nonpartisan program designed to give people of all stripes the ability to tell governments what they think, whether you're subject matter experts or people with lived experiences. We want veterans sharing their thoughts about veterans policies, farmers communicating how funding cuts might affect their work, AI professionals helping to shape the future of artificial intelligence, and youth sports leaders talking about improving governance. We want to make it easy for those who know what's really going on in the world to tell governments what they think should happen. So today I'm here to issue a call to action. If you care about the policies we've just talked about, you can do something. You can share your ideas with policymakers about how to change sports policies. Next slide. I'm going to share when you should speak up, who you should talk to, and how you should go about sharing your opinion. Next slide. This is going to be real audience participation, so get real and get ready. So first, let's lay the groundwork. When should you speak up? Next slide. You should tell governments when you like what they're doing. People often find it easier to give negative performance reviews than positive feedback. Just think about at work. But also know that getting good performance reviews makes us feel better and wants to work harder. So tell government officials when you like what they're doing. That will help encourage them to keep doing that sort of work. On the other hand, thank you. I'm going to take over. There we go. On the other hand, it's also really important to stand up and talk to governments when you think a mistake is being made. Government officials are not always going to get it right, and we are going to disagree with lots of things that we do. So when you see something that you're not happy with, it's time to stand up and say something. Next, sometimes you have an idea for how to solve a problem that no one else has thought of. It's really important to share those ideas. So I'll give you a personal example. As I mentioned, while my full-time job is with the Aspen Institute, I help with the gymnastics scoring system here at Cal Athletics. And I used to get very frustrated that we would let all 4 athletes go at one time, and so you could barely see what was going on, and then there would be long pauses where no one was going while you waited for the judges to do the scoring. So I came up with the idea for what is now called a double dual system, where you have 2 athletes going, alternating back and forth, so there's never more than 2 athletes at the time. And I shared that idea with a number of leaders in the gymnastics community. And I can't say that my one person saying this led to the change, but I can say that momentum got behind that idea. And now when you watch gymnastics regionals on ESPN in the next couple weeks, you're going to see the double dual format. So the moral of the story is that's an idea. You all have ideas that you can share with the ecosystem, but if you don't share them with the decision makers, nothing's going to happen. So let's say you have an idea. What should you do if you want to speak up? First, pick a single priority. You can't cover everything at once. We've talked about 10 different policy topics in this session, 20 more in the one before. You got to pick the one thing that you want to make happen. Next, make it really narrow. So youth safety, incredibly important mission, probably too broad to be able to make real impact. What about focusing specifically on safe sport? How can we improve safe sport? That's going to get people active. And third, don't hold back. Governments need your voice. They work for us. So since governments work for us, I know it's scary to stand up there, but if you do it, you're going to make a difference. So I want to just hear from you. Use your loud, voices. What do you want to make a difference on? Can a couple people just shout it out? I'll use that in a second, but just shout out for a sec.
Equitable access.
Equitable access, great. Who else? Better facilities, wonderful. What else? Safe sport, we do want to improve it. Great. What else? What do you care about? Safe spaces for LGBTQ youth in sport. Great. What else? Volunteer-led. Great. What else?
Increase girls' participation.
Great. More participation. Right. You care about something. So just take a second. What do you care about? Think about that for a second. Okay. So let's say you figured out what you care about now. Who do you go talk to? This is often the hardest part. So first, we need to do a brief civics lesson. So the legislative branch, they make laws. That's at the federal level, that's Congress, that's the Senate, that's the House of Representatives. You heard a lot about them. At the executive branch, you've got the president, you've got the cabinet, and then you've got all those agencies, and their job is to interpret the laws. Oh, and then we haven't talked about the courts, but it turns out they're really important in deciding whether those things make a difference. But that's just at the federal level. The same thing exists at the state level. So your legislative branch at your state is your state legislature. Your executive branch is the governor and the agencies. You have state courts as well. At the local level, you have the legislative branch. That's probably your city or council or your county government. You'll have a city manager. You'll have municipal boards. These are all places you can go to make a difference. So, how do you do it? First, you need to figure out who is actually in charge. And guess what? You have this wonderful tool called Google or maybe ChatGPT that can help you figure it out. Just check ChatGPT if you're using it. Sometimes it gets things wrong. So, say I want to write and ask someone to strengthen safe sport. What do? I Google safe sport and Congress, and I see what comes up. Guess what comes up? A committee called the House Energy and Commerce Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, and they held a hearing on safe sport. Well, great. Now that's a great place to look. That's probably a committee that's involved in regulating safe sport. All I did, safe sport, Congress. That's all I Googled, and that's what came up. So next, it's better if you can reach out to a specific person because then you can address them by name. So you look at who was involved at Congress, and you see that this guy, Morgan Griffin, who's a Republican, was the chair of the hearing. He led the hearing. Okay, that's my person. And then if you're not sure, just call his office. So you can call Morgan Griffin's office and say, are you still the chair in charge of safe sport? Great, now I know who I need to talk to. So, you got your idea, you figured out who you need to talk to, now you just need to figure out how to go about doing it. So, I got 4 tips for you. First, bottom line up front. Always share your main point first. Second, be real simple and clear. Use active voice, simple sentences. Don't use jargon unless you're sure your stakeholder will understand it. Third, make a specific recommendation. Emphasize what you want your stakeholder to change. And last but not least, personalize it. Tell them why it matters to them. Why does RFK Jr. care about this versus a generic person? So let's dig into each of these a little bit more. So first, you were probably taught in school how to tell a story. And your story starts with a little introduction, and then you build up to the climax, and then you fall down, and at the very end, you give your conclusion. If you do that in the policy context, you've already failed. I'm sorry. And the reason for that is policymakers are really busy. You might have what looks like a 30-minute meeting, and they have 3 minutes before they gotta get on their cell phone to call someone else. If you wait till the very end to tell them that story, you've already lost. So a better approach is to put your bottom line up front. You give your key point, then you make an argument for why it matters, and then you repeat it again at the end. That makes sure that nobody misses your point. So let me show you how this works. Imagine that I want to tell my city council that they should install a bike lane on my street. I might do this as follows. I'm here today to ask you to put a bike lane on Sierra Road. A bike lane would help slow down traffic in this neighborhood and will better protect bikers from injury. There have been 3 bike accidents in my neighborhood recently, including a 4-year-old who lives down the block who had to go to the hospital after being hit by a car. I very much hope you will consider adding a bike lane when you do your next traffic study. Thank you. So, let me break down what I said. So first, I began with my request. I gave my bottom line up front. Then I went into my argument for why this is a good idea, and I gave specific evidence. And then at the end, I recap it so that everybody knows what my point was. So second, be simple and clear. Use simple language. Don't meander or distract, but do give concrete details. So notice, I didn't get into all the gory details of everybody who had been hurt in these accidents. I focused instead on the need for the bike lane. I didn't give lots of details about exactly where bike lanes are in the city elsewhere. I focused on the specific argument that I needed to make. Third, make a recommendation. Tell them exactly what you want them to do, not why what they're doing is wrong. So for instance, in my bike lane story, imagine a different version. Imagine I got up and said, we need to improve bike safety in this city. That's great, now you've identified a problem, but what are they gonna do about it? By focusing on a bike lane, I've given them a solution. They can then disagree with that solution and look to others, but I've got them on the right starting point to think about a recommendation. And then also, you want to think about how you can do it. So if possible, I should have given evidence about you wouldn't even need to remove any parking spots along that road, or you could do this when you're actually repaving the road as well. So you can give them the techniques that they could actually implement it. Fourth, personalize it. Make it about the people in the room and share why you matter and why they matter. So first, why you matter. I'm a mom. I have kids that live on that street. I played youth sports. I was a college basketball player. Like whatever it is that gives you that credibility, you need to share it. And then second, why they care. RFK Jr., you really care about, health and prevention. There's no better way to get to prevention than through youth sports. That's how you do it. So, let me give you one more example, and let me preview to you. I'm going to ask someone from the audience to then give it a try as well. So start thinking about if you're willing to be brave. So imagine you're a parent, and your local school district is considering cutting funding for youth sports. I might call my school board and say something like this. I am asking you to maintain funding for youth sports in our district. I am a constituent based in Santa Rosa, and I have 3 children in Santa Rosa schools. Youth sports give children the opportunity to gain confidence, stay healthy, and grow into leaders, which, by the way, you all said, so thank you, panel, for teeing that up. Rather than cutting services, the school district should consider ways to raise revenue instead, such as selling concessions at sporting events. Please keep youth sports funded. Thank you. So again, here's how I broke it down. Bottom line up front, I'm asking you to keep the funding. Why I matter, I have kids in the district. Here's the evidence why youth sports matters. Here's another way to solve your problem. If you need money, then let's raise money rather than cut stuff. And then bottom line up front again, please keep youth sports. Thank you. All right. Are there any volunteers willing to make a pitch live? I gave you all the tips. Be brave. It's a lot easier to do it with me than it will be with your congressperson. We got some? Did you just tell Bailey to do this?
Okay, I'll do it.
All right, thank you, Bailey.
I somehow knew this would happen. Okay.
Is your mic on? Can you all hear?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I think it is. So, okay. I was just thinking, I coach U14 girls soccer at a park in the Bronx, and there's always trash on the field when we go to play. So, hi, I'm writing to address that there's trash on the field where my girls play, which makes it unsafe and dirty, and it's not a dignified play space. I have coached in this community for 3 years, and I live adjacent to the community. What was the last? Yes, could we please increase the frequency of trash pickups in this park, or also provide, no, they should do it. They should just increase. So, as I said, I would appreciate if we could increase pickup in this park. Thank you.
Great job, Bailey. Awesome. So some things that Bailey did really well. Who can name something she did really well? Sorry, say again?
She started off with the problem.
She started off with a problem. Great. I love if you started off with the recommendation, which is just pick up the trash, right? So you got there, yep. Behind you, Marty? Yep.
Thanks. Is it on? Oh. She stayed very specific and did not go meandering.
Great, yes, she was very specific. She didn't start talking about how much she loves coaching youth sports. She focused on the trash. What else did she do really well? Exactly, she personalized it. She made it about her as someone who coaches youth sports, and if she knew the specific stakeholder that she was working with, she could have personalized it to them. So that's it. That's all you got to do. You are all now ready to go call someone, and I hope you will. So we're going to now move into Q&A. This can be Q&A for the panel. It can be Q&A for me. Marty's got the microphone in the back, so what do you want to talk about?
Great panel. Really appreciated it. Betsy, this question is for you. All of these examples that you gave were from advocating as a parent or a coach, but all of us here represents institutions as well, and that's probably more likely where we're going to be advocating for things. And for example, my institution may not explicitly say it, but highly discourages me as an employee to contact my elected representative. They want me to go through their government relations person. So can you talk a little bit about how things might be the same or might be different as you're advocating as an individual versus an advocate in this space?
Fantastic, great question, and thanks for teeing it up. So a couple things. First, I want to know how many of you are at organizations where you're already doing advocacy? Raise your hands. So only about a third. And then how many of you are at organizations that wish you were doing some advocacy but haven't gotten there yet? Okay, so a handful as well. So first, if you're in the situation where your organization is doing advocacy, then yes, you do need to coordinate internally so that the messages don't get mixed up, but you are still a private citizen and are able to call on behalf of a piece of legislation as a private citizen at any point. So you are not prohibited. That's free speech 101. You can still do this as an individual, even if so. And I would encourage you to work with your organization's government affairs to realize that there's a lot of things that even nonprofits can do that we often think we can't. So there's an organization called Boulder Advocacy, which provides lots of trainings that basically go over when you can actually advocate for change, and there's a lot of flexibility for most nonprofits to do that. So if your government relations folks are saying, no, we can't do this, you might want to push them to look at Boulder Advocacy to consider that. More broadly, for the rest of you that aren't already doing this, this is an opportunity to decide whether you want to get involved in the space. So again, the resources at Boulder Advocacy give you trainings, and then our organization at the Aspen Policy Academy, we have all sorts of, and I'll just bump here, we have free programs where you can come and learn to do state and local government advocacy tomorrow. Policy 101, how to get a job. We have sessions on how to tell governments what you think or how to write a public comment. So there are free resources for those of you who want to do this, and we also run programs specifically for nonprofits to teach them how to build an advocacy plan, et cetera. So if you're an individual, you can go out and do this work, and you're all individuals, even if you're represented by organizations. And if you're organizations, it's not that hard to get involved in the space. You just need to learn the rules and learn some of the tips we taught you. And that's exactly what the Policy Academy is here to provide.
Betsy, can I add just on to
Yeah,
the end
please.
of that? First of all, Betsy's presentation is fantastic. And two things. One, if you are advocating for something, remember that the folks that you were talking to, and I'm talking at the federal level, but it probably goes for the state and the local level. One, they're exhausted. And two, they're under fire right now, left and right. I don't care if you're talking to Republicans or Democrats, it's really hard. So acknowledge that it's hard for them. And two, make it easy for them. So when she's talking about bottom line up front, like when we talk about this and we are gonna go and talk about something, I want people to put something on a 2-page, like a front and a back 1 page, right? These folks you're gonna go talk to are gonna take 30 meetings in one day, every 30 minutes on 20 topics. So really make it easy for them. And if you are advocating, you can draft the legislation yourself. They're gonna go change it. But again, the more work you can do for them, all of these folks in government are just, their plates are very full, so really make it easy for them to be able to take in but Betsy is 100% correct. And damn
just
those
add
GR
here-
folks, by the way, they stink.
And just to show you, for those who are at the state panel, you got an example of a perfect style one-pager. Problem, solution, here's what we want to do. This is what you want to leave behind when you leave behind stuff.
So I have one other strategy that we always use at the Y. So Bailey, what you need to do is you need to go to your elected officials that deal with the trash and say, we would really like to invite you out to experience our game. But we want you to come ahead of time so you can see some of the needles that are on the field that one of my girls could fall on. And, or don't even tell them that, but bring them out, and you know there's broken bottles or whatever, walk them around the field. And then have them sit and talk with the girls and have them tell them what sports means to them and how they want to be able to play in a safe space. Because there's nothing like a personal story. Those folks are going to walk back and we got to go clean up that park. Those kids are going to fall. Like, they're going to remember those faces and spaces. So invite them to come. They're looking for good opportunities to be with kids and get a good photo op. And they're going to come and say, we've decided we're going to clean up twice a week because we heard about this problem. They're going to come with a solution, right? That's what they want the story to be. So.
Can I just share a quick success story at the state level? So I see Steve and Carrie Boyle here from 241 Sports in Hartford. They were instrumental in something getting passed in Connecticut, and this is at the state level, slightly different than the kind of hyper local of trash on a field. But they met with a member of the state legislature in Connecticut, talked about the need for increased funding for youth sports, tied that to mobile sports betting and how that could potentially be a source of revenue, and then ultimately testified in front as part of a hearing. And months later, this was passed into law. And so 2% of sports betting revenue in Connecticut is now going to go to youth sports funding. So there are direct positive impacts and success stories that come from this. And Steve and Carrie are a great example of that.
Okay, we have time for one small question. Yeah.
Small, okay.
Yeah.
It's not a small question, but sorry.
A quick answer panel, how's that?
Really quickly, 90% of our healthcare spend goes to chronic disease and mental health, 90%, and it's preventable, the vast majority of it, so that's really important. On the Ernst & Young study on girls and the Women's Sports Foundation, 95% of women in C-suite jobs and middle management had their beginnings in sports, and I want to see the health and sports report. I'd love to see the draft of the health and sports report, but I'm on the leadership team for Project Play Colorado, and I've got this a list of 25 things I want to do when I go back to Colorado. But you've got to keep it simple. I really appreciated the presentation. Thank you so much. How do I think about prioritizing and drafting a policy agenda? Because the time is there. There's a lot of good things. There's a fertilized field and lots of seeds to plant. How do I think about sequencing that?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I tend to think about it as what is most important and what is most timely. And you're going to want to draw those two things on an axis, and you're going to want to put all of your priorities into those axes. So first, what's important? What matters the most to you in Project Play Colorado? Like, what's going to make the biggest difference? Is it safe sport? Is it something about participation? Like, what matters most? And then what fits into this moment best, which might not be the same thing. So what does your governor care about? What does your local communities care about? What is, where is the money? Going back to the money. And then you lay those two things out, and the stuff that are in the important and timely quadrant, that's where you focus your priorities.
Yeah, thank you. That's a big question. And unfortunately, we got to wrap because we're going to lunch, and I can't be that person that stands in the way. So I think a lot of people avoid policy because they don't know what to do. It's not that we have a passion problem, we have a confidence problem. And so I hope today you feel a little bit more confident to go out there and to change the future, period, for youth in sport, because it really is going to take all of us, and the moment is now. And I hope when the moment emerges, we're not asleep at the wheel and we haven't checked out because it's all so much. So just please stay engaged because it's really going to rely on all of our efforts. Thank you so much. Have a great lunch.